And thank you, everyone, so much for joining us for today. Our webinar, The Path to Youth Justice in New York, Reframing the Debate and Investing in Youth. My name is Caitlin Passaretti. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Policy and Advocacy Associate at the Citizens Committee for Children of New York. This event will be recorded and we'll make sure that this recording, as well as any links dropped in the chat, will be sent to you in a follow-up email sometime in the next week or so. I will also be managing the Zoom. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat feature to connect with me. Additionally, please use the chat and Q&A feature to ask questions to our panelists. We do have a Q&A feature at the end. And if you have, again, any questions, please message me on the Zoom chat. And then throughout the webinar, I'll be dropping links into the chat of various resources about what our panelists will be speaking about and a take action that we urge you to support. I'll start with that in the chat right now. And again, so this webinar today, you're going to hear from some incredible speakers on how we as a community, state, and society can improve in order to be better to support young people. So I will now pass to our moderator, Tyler Campbell, to introduce our panelists and frame our conversation for today.
Thank you, Caitlin. First, it's an honor and a privilege to be here. And to everyone watching, I want to say welcome to the Path to Youth Justice in NY panel, brought to you by the Citizens Committee for Children. My name is Tyler Campbell. I come to you all from the Center for Justice at Columbia University, where I do youth advocacy work. I teach with gang-involved young people across all 5 boroughs. I teach inside of Rikers Island. I am a staunch youth advocate, hence why I'm here moderating this panel, and I am beyond excited to kind of get us started. Before I move any further, I want to introduce our esteemed and amazing panelists, each of whom is doing groundbreaking and so important and necessary work around youth justice in New York City. I want to start with Kercena is a member of CCC's research and data team. Kercena Dozier, who is the executive director of the Children's Defense Fund in New York. Anthony Springer, Senior Advocacy Associate at the Bronx Connect. Ashamala Jairam, and the Campaigns Director at the Alliance for Quality Education. And last but certainly not least, Maya Williams, and Research Associate at the Brooklyn Movement Center. Each of them will have a chance to speak momentarily. The way this is kind of going to work structurally, each of them is going to have a block of time to speak a little bit about the work that they're doing, how it relates to youth justice work, because of course, October is Youth Justice Awareness Month, and they'll be highlighting their work. You can find more information about that in the chat. What I will say is what makes an amazing panel is audience engagement. So as they're talking, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, things that you want to talk more about, dump it in the chat right then and there, and we will circle back to it in due time. So just to offer quickly some of my thoughts on, I guess, youth justice and some of the work that we're doing right now across the city. I think there are certainly 2 different criminal justice systems in New York City, right? One that is for people of color in low-income neighborhoods, and one that is for those from affluent backgrounds, right? And this is supported by data and research, which we're going to hear more and more about. But since 2001, I think youth crime has been consistently falling routinely, yet somehow the disparities between youth of color and white youth has been dramatically increasing, right? And so a lot of the work that each of the panelists and myself are doing is focused around how can we address these issues. I think one of the things I always think about is we have to dare to dream of a world in which our young people can feel safe, belonging, and inside of their own communities and neighborhoods, right? And I say this thing often, is like, you're only as free as your last lived dream. And I dream of a world where, you know, we can all come together and be positive, right? I think a lot of times the narrative around youth violence is always clouded by placing the blame on the youth, on the young person, right? Rather than the systems in place that have failed them routinely and put them in the position to commit some of the crimes that they've done, right? I think you can't judge any young person by something they might have committed, because you're judging them off the worst act of their life. And I can speak for myself, and I'm sure a lot of other people, that, you know, if the worst thing you ever committed was all of a sudden now the thing that was being broadcast about you, that would be a very inaccurate picture about who you are as a person, right? And so I think we need to be more trauma informed about how we go about these issues and what we're thinking about and how we can really support our youth, because the solution is not to incarcerate them and give them crimes that will stick with them. I mean, charges that will stick with them for the rest of their lives, barring them from so many different opportunities, you know? And I think part of what we're going to talk about today is how we can create a more trauma-informed criminal justice system, and how you as audience participant members can continue to help out. I think that's the biggest thing. I want to say before I begin and I pass it off to our panelists and we kind of begin our presentation portion, that this is not a one-off event, okay? This is the catalyst to more work happening. Don't come to this call, don't watch this meeting later on and not come outside and actually continue to be the change. Because as my grandmother always used to tell me, child, you are what you do every day. And so my challenge to you is to do what you do every day. So with that, I'm going to pass it off. Yeah, I'm going to pass it off to, I think, Kercena, right? Kercena, this is your opportunity. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for that, Tyler. That was such a great introduction and so important for framing this conversation. So my name is Christina Onea, and I am a research associate for Citizens Committee for Children of New York. And for the past 8 years, I've been working with various organizations on researching policing and ensuring that there's transparency of police data nationwide. And I'd like to help frame this conversation by addressing the narrative that youth crime has exploded in New York through an analysis of the data on youth crime. Fortunately, the data that are available are not in support of this claim. In fact, young people are very unlikely to commit crimes in New York State. In 2021, out of over 4 million minors under the age of 18, only 0.3% were arrested for a crime. This means that out of all arrests in New York State in 2021, minors represented just 4% of arrests. 96% of all arrests in New York State involved adults, not minors. Of the number of minors who were incarcerated, 67% are Black and Latina, even though they represent only 43% of New York State's minor population. If we break this down further, we can see that Black minors make up 16% of New York State's minor population, yet 51% of incarcerated minors are Black. To compare, white minors represent 49% of the minor population in New York State, but only 28% of those incarcerated in 2021. Racial and ethnic discrimination plays a clear role in the arrests of minors, and more policing would only amplify this, especially when crime is historically low for youth in New York State. According to the data available from the Department of Criminal Justice Information Services, youth arrests have been steadily declining over the last decade. From 2012 to 2021, minor arrests in New York State have declined by 83%, going from about 67,000 arrests to about 11,000 arrests statewide. And when we look at what are considered to be the most serious crimes, also known as index crimes, which the FBI uses to assess overall crime levels, we can see overall trends of a declining number of arrests for each crime. Additionally, the two most common index crimes are non-violent crimes, those being larceny and robbery. This pushes against the narrative that youth crime has become more violent, that youth are more responsible for an increased number of violent crimes. It's not the case, and we actually continue to see a decline for violent crimes in New York State. And when we focus in on New York City, the story is actually very similar. Even less of the total number of arrests were of minors, who made up only 3% of all arrests citywide. 97% of all crime in New York City involved adults. Within New York City's population of about 1,700,000 minors, only 0.3% of minors are arrested for a crime. We also see similar trends in the persistence of racial and ethnic discrimination, with a serious overrepresentation of Black and Latina youth in the number of arrests. 93% of minors arrested in New York City are Black and Latina, while only representing 51% of the minor population in New York City. Again, we see that Black minors, who make up 23% of the population of minors in New York City, were arrested at very high rates. While only 23% of New York City minors are Black, 62% of arrests were of Black minors in 2021. In contrast, 28% of New York City's minor population is white, but only 4% of minor arrests were of white minors. And though arrests have been steadily declining for New York City as well, Black and Latina youth are still disproportionately targeted. And in fact, New York City saw an even greater decline in minor arrests over the last decade, going from about 34,000 arrests in 2012 to 4,800 arrests in 2021. This is an 86% decline in minor arrests over the last decade. And when we look at index crimes, as we just did for New York State, we can see that violent crimes have declined and that the majority of minor arrests are represented by nonviolent robbery cases. This 86% decline of total arrests in New York City, combined with the fact that the most common serious crime minors are arrested for is a nonviolent crime, shows the need for more investment and support for youth and not more punitive action. Thank you so much, and I will now pass it to Kercena.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Kercena Dozier, the Executive Director of Children's Defense Fund New York. I am so grateful to be here with you today to talk about this very important issue in a very important demographic of young people who need our support, who need our protection, who need our love, and who need to know that they are valued and respected, and we care about them, and we are not going to allow the state to take us backwards in terms of, incarcerating children and young people who are and doing so in a way that treats them like adults. And so this year, the Raise the Age legislation turns 5 years of age, and so it came by force of a movement of impacted young people in their communities. Partners joined with them from the faith community to child advocates. Who else joined with them? Service providers, legal service groups, and unions. It really took a movement. It really took all of us working together to say to the state that we should not be trying children as adults. To do so is just immoral and is sinful and is unjust. And so after a significant amount of time, a little bit over a decade, that movement was successful in getting the state to pass Raise the Age legislation. And so unfortunately, after COVID and so much death and so much sickness and an economic recession, what we as a state found ourselves in a situation with, rising gun violence that every state is dealing with in this nation because of, different social factors. What we ended up finding ourselves in a place of is that people were saying that, gun violence and rising crime is directly related to Raise the Age, which I am here to directly and explicitly state is not factual by any stretch of the imagination. You just heard the statistics that laid it out very plainly and very simply, that Raise the Age is not the cause of a rise in gun violence in communities across the state and in communities across the nation. There has been a mischaracterization in that regard as it relates to Raise the Age. And so what did we do when that happened? That same movement that made sure and that the state passed Raise the Age, made sure in the most recent, legislative session, budget session, that we didn't go backwards in terms of, making rollbacks to Raise the Age. And so it is just so indicative of the moment that we're in as a nation when you think about just so many issues are being attacked and we are under threat, whether it's, voting rights, whether it's women's reproductive rights. I feel like you can also put in that bucket youth justice rights as well. And so we have to make sure in our quote unquote progressive state in New York that we do not go back, and we do, as some of the previous panelists and speakers have stated, that we make sure that in this moment, we make this a moment where we are investing in our young people. And so I know a lot of statistics, that was already shared, but I'll just, make it super plain. In my presentation to you, when I say that Raise the Age is not the cause of increases in gun violence and different things like that, because during the first 18 months of raise the age law, shootings in New York City remained the lowest they had been in decades. And then while we have seen obviously a surge in gun violence was higher in the 90s and the early 2000s, you know, when all 16 and 17-year-olds were prosecuted as adults. And so the best way I can state it is that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results. And so we know, you know, from research, from data, from statistics, from living this, you know, for generations and for decades, that incarcerating our young people will not solve our crime and our gun violence issues. It is dealing with the root causes of poverty that will actually do so. And I know that we are, you know, inundated, you know, so much by the news with, you know, images, you know, of, you know, gun violence and crime and different things like that. But I honestly wish the news would stay in those communities, past those incidents happening, and show you also the levels of homelessness, levels of housing instability, the levels of hunger, the levels of unemployment, which is actually contributing to violence and different things like that. And so another point that I will make about raise the age is that the state was supposed to allocate, you know, over, I believe it was 4 budget cycles, $800 million towards raise the age legislation, so that we would have, you know, the programs and young people would have the support that they needed as they were dealing with different issues in life. And that has not happened. That has not happened. I believe it's only been $270 million out of the 800 million that has been allocated to, you know, to our young people and to our communities. And so I know someone mentioned earlier that the reason why our young people are in these situations is because of systemic failures that they have, you know, unjustly, you know, been exposed to. And so if we do not do all that we can to make sure that raise the age is successful, if we do not do all that we can in order to make sure that we fully fund raise the age, then we are contributing to another systemic failure that fails our young people. And so we have to make our voices heard, just as we did when we wanted raise the age to pass, just as we did when we were fighting for it to not get rolled back. We have to keep lifting up our voices and saying, hey, state, we are holding you accountable to doing what you said you would do in this legislation in order to make this legislation successful. And so something I said to people recently when I was talking about this particular issue is that enough time hasn't even passed for us to say that we have literally done all that we can to support these young people and to make sure that this legislation is successful. And so I just want to lift that up as well. And so even as it relates to, you know, the 270 million that has gone out the door and 800 has not gone out the door, I also want to lift up the fact that the investment is not equitable. New York City represents half of the young people in our youth justice system, yet we in New York City have been excluded from that funding. That makes absolutely no sense to me. And then also we need to make sure that communities across the state have better access to these funds, meaning these funds get out of the door and are, you know, present in communities. And so communities that most need them. And so whatever red tape we have to like do away with, whatever creative and innovative ways that we need to partner with people who are on the ground and working with our young people, we need to do absolutely just that. And so, you know, lastly, I'll just talk about the fact that, as has been stated so much already, we are talking specifically about children of color, young people of color, Black and Latinx children of color, and our nation, our systems, our state has treated Black and Latinx children and young adults differently than they have treated white children and young adults. And that's obvious from the data that was just shared. And so we have to make sure that we continue to speak about our children of color in ways that is true to who they are. The truth is they are children. The truth is that they are young people, that they are emerging adults, that they are adolescents, and they have every right to live in that existence fully. And when they make mistakes, as we all do, as white children, young adults, emerging adults, adolescents do as well, we need to make sure that we treat them with grace, with mercy, with kindness, and not with incarceration. And there is so much evidence and data and statistics that reveal that our children, our adolescents, and our young adults are not adults. I'll share that, one of the most popular provisions of the Affordable Care Act allow young people to stay on their parents' health insurance plans up to age 26, and in New York State, in some cases up to age 29. I can say, that I was like one of those young people who stayed on and needed to stay on my parents' health insurance, past, a particular time. And so we just have to be honest and real about that. And so we really should. I get so frustrated about this because we fought this fight. We, everything we were supposed to do, the statistics, the data, everything we have done, we have produced. We fought for a decade to get this legislation passed. And so we should now be talking about what more we should be doing to move the youth justice field, more, make it more move it forward more and create more progress for our young people. And so, our founder, Ms. Miriam Wright Edelman, talks about how, children only have one childhood. That's it. So there is an urgency that we have to not just make sure that Raise the Age is successful, but that we do all that we can to make sure that we are making further progress on youth justice, so that we aren't continuing to lose young people to a system that is designed to hurt them and not designed to rehabilitate them. Thank you.
Great. I also just noticed some questions coming in from the chat. So I'm just going to hop in quick about what is Raise the Age. And so thank you so much for that question. So just to backtrack a little bit, Raise the Age is legislation that was passed in 2017 after decades of advocacy, and it raised the age as the title is, so that 16 and 17-year-olds are tried as young people. Up until then, New York was one of 2 states that still tried 16 and 17-year-olds as adults. So now with the Raise the Age legislation, 16 and 17-year-olds go through there. I can share a graphic about this in the chat, but go through the family court for the most part, rather than the adult criminal court. And for severe felonies, they go through the youth part of criminal court. And so they're still always encapsulated within a youth mindset, with judges who are supposed to be trained in youth development. And if they do have to go to certain detention centers, they're in with a youth development mindset, more holistic care, and really aim to make sure that this isn't the end of their life as a young person, which is unfortunately is what had happened previously. And so this is a landmark legislation, and we're really glad that New York has made that step to make sure that 16, 17-year-olds are viewed as who they are, which are young people. And now we're just making sure that 1, they don't go back on that, because the way forward is never backwards. And then 2, that we're able to get more legislation passed to protect more young people and ensure more young people's rights are guaranteed. And that's actually where we're shifting in for the rest of the panel, is to go into 3 specific policies, as well as ending with a holistic approach about how New York really needs to go forward in the youth justice space. So thank you for that question. Hope that was helpful. If there are any more questions about that, feel free to drop it in the chat. Thank you so much. And I will pass it to Kate Rubin.
Sure, thanks, Caitlin. I'm Kate Rubin. I'm the Director of Policy at Youth Represent. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm just going to start by saying I'm stepping in for our amazing campaign organizer here at Youth Represent, Aaliyah Guillory-Nickens, who was supposed to be on the panel and had a family emergency. I cannot take Aaliyah's place. If you know her, you know that she's irreplaceable. But the work that is happening on the Youth Justice and Opportunities Act, which we call YJNO, is so incredible, and the legislation is so important. I wanted to make sure that we included it in the panel. And it also, this piece on Youth Justice and Opportunities Act on YJNO really, I think, builds on Kercena's brilliant remarks about where we need to go post raise the age. So, and also kind of building on what Caitlin just said, raise the age was a tremendous necessary step forward for New York for youth justice. But with raise the age fully in effect, every single 18-year-old in New York, the day a young person turns 18, if they're arrested, they will be arrested, charged as an adult, prosecuted as an adult in adult court, held in an adult jail. And if that, if it's in New York City, that's Rikers Island, sentenced as an adult and face a lifelong permanent record. And that's true for every young person. There's no family court jurisdiction. There's really very little possibility of treatment as a young person for any young person or a teenager, right, starting at age 18. We do have one law on the books, the youthful offender law, often called YO. You'll hear people talk about, I got YO, did you get YO, could you push for YO or ask for YO? And that stands for youthful offender, and that is, New York state law. And it allows for young people who are arrested and prosecuted in adult court to be treated as youth in the sense that a young person who's eligible for YO can get an alternative to incarceration instead of jail or prison, and they can get their record sealed, and they could get their record sealed immediately, and in some cases even while the case is open. So if a young person is in a program with an open case and they're applying for jobs or applying for school or apply for an apartment, that case can actually be sealed even while it's open if in certain cases. So it's a really powerful tool. It does not undo all the harms and racism of the criminal justice system, but it is a really important tool that provides some protections for young people who are in the system and who are being treated as adults in the criminal legal system. But there are huge, huge limitations. The biggest limitation of YO is that you're only eligible for it before your 19th birthday. So only young people who are arrested for something before they turn 19 are even eligible for YO to begin with. And now that we've raised the age, and most 16 and 17-year-olds are rightfully in family court if they're arrested, we're really talking mostly about 18-year-olds who access youthful offender YO. There are other limitations too, limitations based on the charges that you're arrested for, limitations based on having a prior felony conviction. You'll hear people say that I burned my YO, or we don't want to have to burn your YO, because once you get felony YO, you can never get it again. So that's where YJNO comes in, Youth Justice and Opportunities Act. What it does is it expands opportunities for alternatives to incarceration and immediate record sealing for young people and emerging adults up to age 25. It does this in two ways. It makes it more accessible to get YO. It removes some of the limitations and makes it so that more young people who are under 19 will get youthful offender. And then it also creates a new young adult status that young people up to age 25 are eligible for. And it creates a lot more presumptions in the system so that many, many, many young people, if this bill passes, would get youthful offender or young adult status, and be able to get their record sealed and be able to have alternatives to incarceration and not be in jail or prison. So when enacted, YJNO would expand the YO law, protect the futures of young people ages 25 and younger, providing emerging adults the opportunity to move forward in their lives without the barrier of a criminal conviction. YJNO would reduce, by doing this, it would reduce the money that we spend on state and local incarceration, and that money instead could be invested in communities and in young people to address poverty, homelessness, to ensure education. That funds could be spent on things that young people and families and communities need instead of policing, incarceration, prisons, jails. New York was one of the last two states in the country that was still automatically prosecuting 16-year-olds as adults in 2000 17, right? It was a shameful status. We were one of the last states to raise the age. We have the opportunity with YJNO to actually be in the lead and to lead the whole country by showing where youth justice can go and reflecting the science and understanding across many fields, including developmental psychology and law, that emerging adulthood is a real period in people's lives that lasts into the mid-20s, and that we should have different laws that protect young people differently. We have an incredible campaign. Again, Aaliyah is our campaign organizer. We have a great steering committee of a bunch of different organizations. We will share the campaign website. There's opportunities to get involved. We formally launched the campaign in May. We will share the one-pager in the chat. We will be holding a rally before the end of 2022 so that we can make sure that this piece of legislation is high on the radar for the 2023 legislative session. We'll be going to Albany, we'll be having lobby days, we'll be having press conferences. So I hope you will be seeing this bill. We encourage everybody to join us and be part of the campaign. There's really incredible work being done. We're super excited about it.
So I am Anthony Springer. I am the Senior Advocacy Associate over at Bronx Connect. And I want to talk to you guys just briefly about a bill that we're excited about, and a bill that's much needed, just like all of these bills. You know, I was speaking earlier with the panelists, and I said, you know, all these things fall hand in hand, and they all need our support. The bill that I want to talk about is the Youth Interrogation Bill. This is a bill that's been we've been fighting for since 2019. You know, this bill in essence is really a protection for young people ages 18 and younger when it comes to interrogations, and when it comes to really providing the help for them that's needed when facing really an adult system and adult situations. The reality of interrogations as it is right now is it's geared towards people who can understand. It's geared towards people who have the support, and it's geared towards people who know the system. But when you're a young person and your brain is still developing, as we know, research shows that brains are still developing up into the age of 25. When you're a young person and you're facing interrogation, and you're facing the police, who are very forceful and at times manipulative, to get what they want across, or to close a case, or whatever it is, we found research has shown that young people are you know, just because they want to get out of the situation, or just because there's a lack of understanding, they will go and say whatever they feel they need to get out of that interrogation room. So what this bill does in essence is provide extra protections by solidifying their right to remain silent. This bill says that at the moment a child is in custody and the police want to talk to that young person, want to begin the interrogation process, they have to immediately connect them with a lawyer, with legal representation, legal counsel, so that they can not just understand their rights, just so that they can make the right decisions there. This was a bill that is sponsored in the Senate by Senator Bailey, and is sponsored in the Assembly by Assemblywoman Joyner. It's S2800C and A5891C. Again, this is something where we're seeing on the you know, there's millions of young people who are facing interrogation and not having that representation, and we know that young people are 3 times more likely to confess to a crime that they did not commit. You know, there was a statistic that I had heard, and that was disturbing, that in New York we're spending $77 million since, I believe it was from 2001 to to pay for people who have been exonerated. And that's why, because young people who have been exonerated. Why? Because when getting into that interrogation room, they don't know what to say. They don't know how to deal with it. This law provides that protections. Right now, we know that police are allowed to interrogate a child without a parent or guardian. They are allowed to lie to a young person in order to get their desired result. They're not required to explain to a child or child's parent or guardian what the police want to question them about. And just imagine that, most of us here are adults, and being able to being put in that situation, how would you respond? We've constantly heard from young people here at Bronx Connect who have faced this system, because you ask the question, hey, you have the Miranda rights. Do you understand you have a right to remain silent? But the reality is, especially, and I think that some of the other panelists that have hit on this, when you're dealing with an impoverished situation, where your rights and protections really are not there, you don't feel like you have the rights. And this is what the young people have said. We don't feel we have rights when we're in that interrogation room. Yes, I can be told I have the right to remain silent, but it's not really a clear understanding of what the long-term effects of my what I'm going to say. Not understanding that it's not just say, hey, I'm not just saying this to get out of the room, but it's going to be used against me in the future. So what this bill does is basically say that police, you have to connect this young person with a lawyer. What this bill is changing in essence is that again, they have to connect them with a lawyer. If they do not connect them with the lawyer, the police can still question them, but whatever they said at that moment cannot be used against them in the court of law. So this doesn't stop police from doing their job. This doesn't stop cases from being closed. What this does is says we need to protect our young people, because youth are not adults. Youth don't understand at the level that adults do. So this is what this says. We have decades of research that shows that youth lack the capacity to weigh the long-term decisions, And if they lack capacity, we have to, as responsible adults and responsible community, step in and say, how can we protect? A stunning statistic is that over 90% of youth waive their right to remain silent before speaking to attorneys. 90% of youth, and from the statistic that you heard earlier in this panel, we're talking about primarily minority youth. And that's, and that may be a reason why some of these bills are overlooked or take long to get the support they need. Why? Because it's primarily our minority children that are in the poorer neighborhoods. Because when you grow up in the suburbs or in the neighborhood where there is the funding there's the family funding, the first thing that they do when you're going to face interrogation is let's call our family lawyer. Now when you get Rico from down the block, their family lawyer is no one. A lot of times they're going to interrogations, not even having the family support. Even going deeper there, what we've also seen is that in situations where you're getting young people that are impoverished going into these interrogations, even when their parents are there, it's not as much support as you would think it would be. Because most parents don't really understand the rights either. So now we're in a situation where these supports need to be supplied. We found also that there are 3 states that also have already enacted these type of bills, and they found again that it really has no effect on the police's ability to do their jobs. You have California who has already done it, who has already put it in. You have Washington who already has a bill, and we have Maryland also that has a similar bill. All of these states have already enacted similar bills and seen that it doesn't affect police's ability to do their jobs. So this is why, you know, we as advocates, and we have to continue pushing and for this, because this is a bill that's needed. Just like every one of these bills that you're going to hear about today, this is much needed for these wraparound services. You know, I think that, you know, I don't think that you could do one without the other, because we're just little pieces of the puzzle. You know, to have the mental health of our community, the mental health of our city, be where it needs to be. You know, I spoke again about how it's affecting our minorities. We're in this situation. We're in this situation in the city where we just came off of, you know, a few years ago, powder keg. You know, where things were really crazy. For especially with race relations, but we're now at a point where we can begin to see change. We last session we had this bill passed through the assembly. You know, we passed at 105 to 45, so the majority of the assembly pushed it through, and it passed in the Senate. It passed through the Codes Committee. So we're currently you know, looking to garner more support in that area, to get more senators on board, you know, just so that we can see this pass by this next session. We've heard from our sponsors, and it is a top priority from them. We've heard from the governor. The governor has no issues. As soon as it gets in front of her desk, she's ready to, you know, she's ready to listen to it deeply. So we need support, and just, you know, we're just like everyone else here. We need the support. We need, you know, I believe that we're going to send out some information. We have one pager. We also have a petition that you can sign on to, and if you want to join our coalition, we have a link for your organization to join the coalition, and, you know, we're going to fight this together.
Shula, I believe you're next up to present.
Thank you. And just correcting, my name is Amshala. I'm the campaigns director for the Alliance for Quality Education. And I just want to say, you know, Anthony mentioned this as well, but all of these issues are like very, very deeply interrelated. And I know it sounds a little bit obvious to say that, but I just can't emphasize that enough. And also to say that two things, that in a former life, I worked on criminal justice reform, police practice reform, and wrongful convictions. And once you are in the system, it is really, really difficult, if not impossible, to get out. And that's why we have to start upstream, like all the way upstream, right? And that means things like universal childcare and early childhood education. In this case, it also means reforming the way that we discipline children in schools. So schools, you know, are like ground zero, right? Like this is the first locus point where children are disciplined, are expelled, etc., right? So that's where we want to start. Similarly to the statistics on crime, we find that even when suspensions are reduced, disparities persist. So, and to like sort of frame the problem, sorry, I went away from my talking points for a second, it screwed me. So to state the problem, so in New York State, students lose hundreds of thousands of days in the classroom each year because of suspensions. A lot of times these are for normal youthful behaviors. I've heard everything from they like went in the wrong entrance, or, you know, they violated a dress code or something like that. This year in Buffalo, for example, there were 200 suspensions in just the first 17 days. And these punishments disproportionately impact Black students, they impact Latinx students, students with disabilities, and LGBTQ youth. I use the term disproportionate, which is sort of an academic and sanitized way of describing what is actually a really, really serious issue, that certain students are being targeted in ways that their peers aren't, and that this will have consequences not only for their immediate learning, but for their entire life trajectory, right? And some of that trajectory are the things that my fellow panelists have laid out here today. When we think about the school to prison pipeline, right, and the school to deportation pipeline, that starts again in the schools. It starts at that upstream point. NICLU has some statistics that Black children represent 31% of school arrests. They're suspended and expelled at 3 times the rate of white students, and are 3 times more likely to be involved in the juvenile justice system in just the following year, right? For students who are expelled for discretionary violations. And discretionary means, like, you know, it's up to the teacher or the principal or whoever, most likely the principal. The second thing on the school to deportation pipeline. So I'm not a deep expert in this, but I will just say that we are at a moment where we have hundreds of thousands of children who have just crossed the border, who risked their lives to come here because that's just how bad their situation at home in their home countries were. And so the stakes are really, really high for all of these kids. They have intense trauma. They're going to need lots of support, and they cannot risk being pushed out of school and potentially interacting with the justice system, because the result could be, in fact, being deported and sent back to the country that they risked everything to flee. And then beyond that is just learning loss. You know, one of our youth advocates talks about how he was suspended in high school for 6 months, right? Like half a year of learning just lost, and no engagement in the interim. And when you do that, you not only make it that much harder you make it harder for a kid to like catch up on what they lost, right? That means they might not go to the next grade. They might not graduate high school. They might not graduate college. It's not a coincidence that the majority of people in state prisons have very low levels of education. It's because people don't have opportunities, right? They don't have opportunities to legitimately earn money, to legitimately advance themselves, and to live lives with dignity. And so the bottom line is, we can continue to suspend kids, but we're just not solving the problem. Like, we're not solving the problem of conflict in the schools. Suspensions are not a deterrent. And we need tools that get to the heart of the conflict and help students and adults work through difficult situations, and ultimately make our schools positive and safe places for our children to grow and learn and make mistakes and all of it, right? So the Solutions Not Suspensions Act, again, the goal is to really respond to children in a way that's proportional and graduated, and to make suspensions the last option instead of the first. The bill essentially establishes statewide standards for the use of school disciplinary practices. It applies to both public schools as well as charter schools. It's not a silver bullet. It's going to have to work in tandem with lots of other supports and policies for successful implementation, but it is a really, really critical first step against the worst kinds of harm that students can experience in school. There's 5 sort of core tenets of the bill. The first is including restorative justice practices in in a school's code of conduct. Every school has a code of conduct. The second is to limit the use of suspensions for children in pre-K through 3rd grade to only the most serious behavior that's required by federal law. I think we can all agree that suspending 5-year-olds should not be a practice in our schools. It prohibits suspensions for minor infractions like dress code violations or talking back. It shortens the maximum length of suspension from 180 days to 20 school days. Under current New York law, it is legal to suspend a child for an entire school year. And it requires that for students who are suspended, that they receive instruction, that they have the opportunity to earn credit, complete assignments, and take exams. In terms of the impact, I think, number one, we're making sure that students are going to stay in the classroom and are not losing critical instructional time, right? That's, again, very difficult to make up. Two, that we're teaching students that they can trust the adults in their lives to help them work through conflict, and that mistakes are okay, right? We all make mistakes. It's how we then respond and move forward that is really important. And ultimately, we want to create a better climate for students and for teachers. Just to sort of step back for a second and kind of paint the larger picture. So we do have a few other things that are happening in New York State right now around school discipline. The first is that the Attorney General is actually investigating the Buffalo School District because of these disproportionately high rates of suspensions. And to me, it says if the chief law enforcement officer of the state thinks that suspensions are a problem, then this is something that all of our lawmakers should be looking at too. From Rochester to Buffalo to Syracuse, there's lots of local organizing around school climate, including in places where codes of conduct were introduced that were very positive, but fell completely short of the actual spirit of the code of conduct and full implementation. The third thing I wanted to add is that the Times Union has been investigating the use of corporal punishment in schools. Out of a universe of something like 250,000 complaints lodged with the State Department of Education, 1,600 have been substantiated, showing children who have been slapped, choked, hit, etc. So the bottom line, I think, is that, there is sort of a pressure cooker situation in these schools, and we need to find an effective way to address it. And the effective way is not just kicking kids out of the classroom. It's not solving the problem. I'd also note this bill has run the legislative cycle now for 7 or 8 years. The furthest it has gotten is to the floor, meaning the whole body in the assembly. It has not even gotten out of a committee in the Senate. And for those of you who are not in legislative work, the first step is a bill is introduced. The second one is that it goes to a committee. The third is that the entire body votes on it. So that's how little progress we've actually made. Our biggest roadblock, our biggest opposition are the teachers' unions. I can talk a little bit more about that later, but just to say that the unions are not in favor of this bill, and that's been a huge roadblock for us. The other point is that lawmakers are not feeling the kind of pressure from communities to overcome the political power of the unions, and that's on us, right? That's on the advocates to really figure out how can we better mobilize people and galvanize people. So I'll stop there, but just add that I also have the Twitter handles of our 3 biggest targets: Governor Hochul, Senator Shelley Mayer, who heads the Education Committee in the Senate, and the Assembly member Michael Benedetto, who chairs the Education Committee in the Assembly. These are the 3 people that we need to move if we want to get any kind of action. So if folks want to right now, if it's okay with Caitlin, I'm just going to pop their Twitter handles in. Feel free to take a second and tweet away. I can even give you a very boring but to the point tweet that you can add. So if that's okay, I'll do that right now. And thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to pass it now to Maya.
Before me just truly laid the my name is Maya. I'm social for research impacted or affected by policy that continues that harmed us. And it's really to think that this vaccine can be used
Maya, I'm Maya, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but your audio is cutting in and out. Is there any way you could try maybe turning your camera off or like resetting maybe? And then, oh, she's gone. Okay. Well, in a quick little interlude, hopefully she'll be able to hop back on. But in the meantime, this is a perfect time for you to tweet what Amshala has just put in the chat. And welcome back, Maya. Hopefully I'm sorry about if there was a connection issue, but it looks like you're moving on my side. So I'm going to just pass it right on back to you.
I'm so sorry about that. Can you guys hear me now?
Perfect. Yes, thank you.
Okay, sorry. So yeah, where I left off was that research, like my first time seeing how impactful research can be used to like guide policy was after the passing of Raise the Age. I was a research associate at the Youth Justice Research Collaborative, which is a partnership of folks that most of the organizations that are here, which is Youth Represent, Children's Defense Fund, the CUNY Grad Center, Public Science Project, and Citizens Committee for Children of New York. And our goal was to use participatory action research, which is really grounded in like science and justice and a belief that like true knowledge around the realities of the worlds that we live in comes from centering the lives of the people of the system. So in our work, we tried to study Raise the Age and evaluated its intended effects, its successes, the lessons learned, from the legislation, and truly like the problems that continue to persist, to ensure that the realities of young people are not in this current state, right? Like where we're thinking about rollbacks, we're thinking about continuously incarcerating young people, and throwing away a victory like Raise the Age. When we do see some of the successes, it's just that we need to continue that progress of actually looking at young people, as children, and really deterring their presence in the carceral system. But one important thing goes like towards the lack of accountability for the systems, the lack of the budgets and decision makings that continue to truly like prioritize the death of young people instead of like their lives. And how we did this was a multi-method approach, where we did court observations within the New York City Family Court and Youth Park courts, over, I want to say 819 court observations, over 1,000 hours of like research assistants literally sitting in court and monitoring the court cases that went through Raise the Age legislation. And we were able to look at it from the first phase and the second phase when 18-year-olds were we're that age where young people were not being tried as adults. And out of the core observations, we continue to see like the reliance on detention instead of looking at the progress of young people, continuously seeing like the surveillance of young folks inside the court and outside the court, and just the overall like dehumanizing court environments that continue to persist. But what was one of the most like impactful methods that came out of this participatory action research were focus groups. We conducted 3 two-day workshops with 16 young people aged 15 through 19 who have experienced the concepts of Raise the Age. And we actually like allowed them to tell us, like, unfortunately, they're the experts of the system, and we've allowed them to tell us their experiences within the system, how they viewed what was happening, how they were being treated. And out of that, there was some heavy information that, you know, came out when you hear from the young folks who are actually experiencing these things. One, telling us, like, we're not criminals, right? Like, this goes against the narrative that a lot of folks that we're seeing on the media, how a lot of folks are looking at young people as wanting to actually commit crimes. They don't. They talk to us about the cost of like them being in the system, right? And not just the financial cost, but like the time, like their families being torn apart, them being unable to advocate for themselves, constant punishment and like remand despite progress, whether they're graduating, despite them going into programs that really they talked about how a lot of the programs really don't assess the needs that they want and they need in order for them to really be progressing in life. But then most of all, like young people still being physically and verbally abused by NYPD and court officers within the system. But one thing that really came out of it was like young people really talking to us about the need to wanting to be understood, the need to wanting to be heard, to have some sort of agency of their life as they navigate the system, but also the lack of money being the root cause of them even like committing crimes, right? The lack of funds that their families are never having access to. So I say all that to say is like, yes, gun violence is an extreme issue, and it is true, like when the media uplifts that. But when we look at young people, they don't want to commit these things, right? There's a narrative that floats around saying that, young folks want to do these things, but instead, young people are not like bad people. They're just victims of structural racism, victims of structural violence, right? Gun violence is definitely driven by structural violence. And when I say structural violence, I'm talking about like social institutions, social structures that for decades, for centuries have continued to harm not just young Black people, but people of color overall throughout the city, and continues to like produce inequality, continue to produce health inequities in the well-being of young people. So now in my role, like at the Brooklyn Movement Center, we aim to really like educate and move folks with research about structural violence and deeming gun violence and the realities of our neighborhoods now as a direct result of, yes, claiming that gun violence is a public health issue, but a lot of the approaches that we're continuing to take are not public health solutions, right? Like how do we fight public health issues with policing and like intense policing as opposed to public health solutions, instead of really investing more into our communities as opposed to investing in carceral systems? And we wrote a report which is entitled the Invest in Black Futures, a public health roadmap for safe New York City neighborhoods. And this, I think Caitlin will drop the link. Thank you so much. This report was really a direct response to Mayor Adams's approach to gun violence, which he entitled The Blueprint to End Gun Violence. His approach to ending gun violence really proposed intense policing, bringing back of the anti-crime unit, and as all of the panelists have talked about, some extreme like rollbacks of concepts of RTA as a solution to gun violence and the realities of young people being arrested, continuance of like just Black population continuing to be incarcerated. And in this report, we make the argument that if we continue to criminalize Black people, if we continue to criminalize young people, the harms of structural violence will still persist, right? Black New York City communities continue to be targeted. They have been for decades, for centuries, and they've been targeted with systematic deprivation of the social determinants of health. In my saying like social determinants of health, I mean like quality housing, quality food, affordable housing. We're talking about just opportunities that predominantly white neighborhoods have access to. And we know that the communities that are most safe are those with the most resources, right? So there's research that shows, and really what we did was what we call a tale of two neighborhoods within this report. And we looked at a neighborhood like Brownsville, which is predominantly Black, specifically 76% Black, where violence is routine, right? And then we compared that with a neighborhood like the Upper East Side, which is predominantly white, 78%, which does not have as much violence and does not encounter as much gun violence as predominantly Black neighborhoods, right? And we tell this story to not say Black people want to constantly be committing these crimes or be living in these ways, but because of structural violence and structural racism, these are the realities, right? So the annual income of a Brownsville community being $30,000 versus an annual income in the Upper East Side, $125,000, right? In Brownsville, with these lack of resources, there's 47% of children in Brownsville that live in poverty, 20% of children in the Brownsville Community School District who are unhoused. We look at the lack of quality food, right? For every one supermarket in Brownsville, there are 5 bodegas. And then we compare that to the rates of incarceration in predominantly Black neighborhoods. Specifically, Brownsville is 24 times higher than that of the Upper East Side. So we put this in a framework to just really say, like, how do we solve the issues of violence, particularly gun violence? We don't solve that by continuing to put young people in jail, but we solve that by addressing the structural violence and changing the status quo of inequity, changing the racialized disinvestments. And we do that by divesting from carceral approaches and actually investing in our communities. And we hear a lot of people in the media say, oh, use research, right? But research directly from the American Public Health Association, they have done so much research on this where they've proven that policing is not the answer to the problems of violence, right? That actually causes more harm. It causes more mental health issues, traumas, PTSD, depression, and just generations of like folks relying on substances. And if we continue to do that with our young people, we continue to make those mistakes and continue to make criminalizing color in young people as a habit, right? And ignoring the violence that young people themselves face at home or just from being born and being in Black communities. There's structural violence that persists before young people even get their hands into the system. So I say all that to say, like, this is just hearing a lot from the panelists before me, like, all the power to you guys for like really advocating for these policies. And it comes full circle with our need to investing in communities with social determinants of health. Again, stable and affordable housing, increasing young folks' opportunity to be a part of like community-centered programs, be a part of getting mental health services, and non-carceral programs, more funds going to youth development, comprehensive quality education, citywide restorative practices, and really like funding ways in which young people can be heard, that they have opportunities to not be deprived in the ways that they have been for decades. So thank you.
So thank you, Maya, for that. If I'm going to move into now the period of Q&A. So first, I mean, we could just do like a little like, moment of celebration again for all of our panelists. That was an amazing thing. We really, really appreciate all of that. And so now, again, audience members, this is your opportunity to throw some more questions in the chat. We've been monitoring the chat. So if you have any more questions, please get those in there. But we're going to move to our Q&A at this current moment. I think my first question for everyone is, I think we heard so much about the amazing and important work you all are doing, but we don't know much about you yourself. And so I was curious if you could all go around and share a little bit about why you do the work that you do and why you keep doing it and the importance of it in that kind of way. Any brave soul would like to start?
I guess I'll start just briefly. I have I've had a history of working not just with young people, but working with community. And what really lights a fire under me is seeing the necessary steps to begin making change. I came on with Bronx Connect back in March, and the first thing I thought when I saw this bill, the right to remain silent, I said, this is a common sense bill. Why have we not passed it yet? And then just connecting with other organizations and hearing the work that they're doing, it's amazing for me to be a part of the bigger picture, and getting on our end to get to see young people get excited to hear about some of this stuff and say, hey, how can I make a change? We had a summer series on advocacy this recently, and some of the organizations came on and spoke, and young people were like, man, I didn't even know about this, and how can we get involved? So this is what continues to light a fire under me to do this work.
I would just say, I think a lot of it is around just like how empowered I feel when I'm connecting with the young people, like just going back to when we were able to conduct the focus groups. If you can see like how beautiful they speak about themselves, the talents that they have, the willingness to voice their experiences, the willingness to just be vulnerable. We were able to like put them in opportunities to like guide our research, like tell us what you want. to what the narrative should be. Like they were able to be put into what we create, like a youth advisory board. So they're telling us what are the experiences that need to be put into like report writing. So they're phenomenal people. And I think that what continues to drive me is that the world doesn't know how phenomenal they are. I myself am a mom of an 8-year-old Black and Latinx child. So looking at him every day and like that fear around him can like possibly being like a victim to the system is really, really like what wakes me up every day to continue to show up for people, but then also having the opportunity to like be talking and connecting with all of the beautiful people that are on this panel, right? Like we all have a passion to see a better world. Someday we might not be here when it fully transpires, but like those are the things that continue to keep me going and keep me striving to see a better world.
I'll jump in. So I love children. I love young people. I love humans just in general. I feel very called and purpose to do the work of justice. I hate injustice. Anytime I sense it, I hear it, I read about it, something just wells up inside of me and I want to act. And I also just believe in our power and in our duty and in the moral call to make the world a better place. And so where people tend to not see the value and love in people and in spaces, I tend to do so and feel called to want the world to see the same.
All right, so we're gonna move along. I think one of the other things that I kept coming up in the chat from the Q&A feature from audience members is we have a lot of people who are movers and shakers in the city, in the state, who are here watching, want to be a part of these discussions. And so I guess the question to you all again is, how can they get involved? How can they support with your specific initiatives or in a more broad sense? I think that's always, we want to keep an action-oriented lens, that these aren't just panels, these aren't just discussions that we're having, but we're looking to actually do the work. And so how can folks get more involved, whether that be, tweeting, as we did earlier, but some other solutions as well, ways to get involved.
So I can say for Youth Justice and Opportunities Act, I'm going to ask, I don't think I can chat to the whole group, so I'm going to ask if Caitlin can share again the form to get involved with the campaign. If you sign up there, then you'll get on our email list and we will share upcoming rallies, events, lobby days, and also social media and what, absolutely need folks involved in the campaign, especially young people, but really everybody. So that's the way for YJNO.
So I can follow that for solutions, not suspensions. Again, I think this is a bill that's really been put on the back burner for a long time, and people are not understanding like the moral imperative, right? That we don't want to be punishing our babies from day one. I would say, for the folks, I can't see who's on the call, but, for folks who want to get involved, one, I'm going to put my email in the chat, and you can for sure reach out to me. The more, the merrier. We really need to build strength and build a big tent. The other thing I would say is that, again, just emphasizing, we have some very clear targets. The governor, and the two chairs of the education committees, Shelley Mayer and Michael Benedetto, need to move, and we will not get any progress on this bill unless they move, and they need to hear from folks that they deeply care about this issue. The other thing I would say, and this might get me in some trouble, but I would encourage folks to reach out to, the heads of these teachers unions, right? The United Federation of Teachers, and then the other one is NYSUT, NYSUT, New York State union of teachers, I think is what it is, because they need to also hear that, like, this is what communities want. We want common sense standards, right, that actually protect and nurture our children instead of allowing them to be pushed out. And we see what happens when they're pushed out. So I'm going to drop my email in here. Again, the Twitter handles for our targets are right there. Tweet them, call them, email them, ask for a meeting, just get in there and share your story, or share why this is like unacceptable. It's such a basic thing. And the fact that we can't pass this bill is really shameful.
Yeah, I'm going to echo those sentiments. I'll put my email in the chat. We also put out links if you're an individual to sign up, or if you're an organization and you want to join the coalition, feel free to join us there. So we're always looking for voices, because this is what we need right now: voices to call your elected, your state senators and your state assembly people. We're always looking for support, ideas, whatever it is. Send me an email. We'll get you on our list, and we'll get you connected to what's next.
All right, so thank you for those responses. My next question is actually aimed to you, Maya, but other folks are welcome to piggyback off this answer if they would like. I'm thinking about, we talked about holistic solutions to supporting young people, right? And so I'm interested, there's also kind of like, how can we have a more trauma-informed criminal justice system that looks more so at, the wider causes that are driving our youth towards committing crimes, and how can we support them in that way? And also, could you explain potentially what that means as well when we say things like that? Because I think some folks had a bit of a difficulty with that as an idea.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the things is as simple as not communicating with young people from a power structure, right? Like viewing them as humans, talking to them as humans. I could say for us, even in like doing the research, like showing up as your human self and not as somebody that's more educated to them, or more in a different position than they are, but also giving them that sort of like leadership role, right? Like they feel so empowered when it's just like, hey, I want to learn from you, or hey, what is it that you need? Hey, what is it that you want to do? Like we've done even in the focus groups, we've done a lot of like brainstorming with them about what do they visualize, or what is their vision of freedom, right? What are the things that they feel like they've needed before they even enter the system? What are the things that they need now? What are the things they wish they had, right? And a lot of them talked about just in their communications with like probation officers, like not having agency in those relationships, or like when we're talking about schools, not having agency in schools to even just say, hey, I'm having a bad day, or hey, I need this thing, right? Like, and it's just like, in a sense, like there is no wrong or right way. But I think that in communicating with young people, just being a listening ear, they talked about that a lot. Like even when they have the cuffs on them and they're in court, they're like, I wish I could have said this. I wish I had the opportunity to just say like, that wasn't me when I got arrested, or this happened to me when I got arrested. This is the reason why I'm even a part of the system, and I don't want to stay here. I don't want to constantly be getting arrested. You have some young people who are dealing with so many traumas who no one has ever heard about it, or they're never given an opportunity to hear these things. And I think that also brings me back to where like we even change the narrative on what research is. Recently, like doing focus groups with older Black men, like to just create a space for them to be vulnerable, to know that there's safe spaces to communicate their experiences, and then putting them in leadership roles to say, hey, what is your ideal world, or what is it that we can be doing to support you, to make sure that this is not continuous, like generational traumas that continue.
Thank you for that answer. I'm looking in the chat right now, and I see there is a question aimed towards you, Shala, if you wanted to take that and just reread it as well. For those who might not be able to see it, I'm not exactly sure how Zoom works, but if you wanted to. take that.
Tyler, is it the one in the Q&A?
Yes, that one,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, so I think the question was around, yes. So to answer your question, Robin, the DOE did indeed implement those reforms. So what Robin's question is about, the New York City DOE Code of Conduct. And it was revamped to actually reflect a lot of what is already in the Solutions Not Suspensions Bill, which again makes it a little confusing why particularly UFT, which represents, you know, New York City teachers, is in opposition, because a lot of it for New York City is already in place. Again, I don't have deep expertise, but I will say that from what I understand, the suspensions have come down in New York City. They have definitely dropped as a result. But again, just like in actually even in Buffalo, suspensions have come down, right? But the disparities persist. So, which means like, yeah, there's less suspensions, but it's still disproportionately Black students, Latinx students, students with disabilities. The same kids are being targeted. And so it has persisted as a problem for sure. So I don't want the takeaway to be that like SNS is not worth it, because it still is. Again, you know, we're talking about protecting kids from the worst kinds of harms. I will say that the job of rooting out, you know, the deep kinds of biases that result in certain students being targeted is you know, as Maya said before, you know, it's the work of a lifetime and probably many lifetimes. So it's, you know, it's not a silver bullet, but these do provide us with some basic guardrails and some essential principles that we should all be able to rally around. Robin, I don't know if that was helpful, but thank you for your question.
Thank you for that answer. So we're coming up almost on time. So I just wanted to also get some other voices in. So Kercena, there was an interesting point that you were bringing up about community safety in your presentation. And I'm thinking about, first off, I guess, what does community safety mean and look like to you? Because I think there are, like, this is one of those things, especially around youth justice, that we see that kind of gets thrown around as a buzzword. We need to rethink community safety and reimagine what community safety looks like, right? But I'm interested, what does that actually mean to you in practice? And how can we actually go about actually supporting our young people so they feel safe in their communities in the first place?
Such a great question. I actually spent a couple of years leading a community policing task force in the neighborhood in which I live in Harlem, which was really focused on like a response to like the George Floyd incidents and different things like that. And, you know, the nation was, and the world, you know, was in a place of such unrest about how we were seeing policing utilized to harm, you know, communities of color. And so we were trying to reimagine, you know, safety and community policing in a way in which the community plays a part in, you know, making sure that the community is safe. So what does it look like for people in the community to come together and decide to, we called it, what did we call it? We called it, I forget the name, but it was like Love Your Block or something like that. So like targeting, you know, blocks in the community that had a high level of crime, a high level of like gun violence, and having people from the community like walk those blocks, you know, talk to people, you know, provide them, you know, like masks and water and different things like that. You know, people have been locked up for so long, like inside because of the pandemic. And so people wanted to be out on the streets, people wanted to be in community with one another. And so what does it look like to be able to like make space for that, for people, and for people to not feel as though them being out in their community, you know, that they were making it unsafe. And so like, how do we make sure, you know, the police isn't impeding on people's, you know, freedom and different things like that. And so I think that a model of community policing that is rooted in the community, where the community is saying, this is how, we want to create a safe space for ourselves is really, really important. When I also hear safety, I think about what does it mean for our children to be safe, right? Like what type of safe environment do they need? And I know Maya talked a lot about it, right? Like, having access to, nutritious food, having access to, a habitable home, like those things provide children a sense of safety. I know I was talking to a district attorney a couple of weeks ago about this, the issue of, the rise in crime and how do we deal with it. And she said, like, a lot of these young people are jumping, couch surfing because they don't have a stable place to stay. They are also like sleeping on the train. So just something as simple as providing a young person stable housing makes such a big difference. And so I think those are things that I think about. What do our children need to be safe? And I think once you start there, the community as well will be safe.
Wow, thank you for that. That was a really, really poignant response. We are coming up on time, and I do want to be respectful of folks, but I had one more question, and I think kind of as I was thinking about this work, I mean, we often cite a lot of research, a lot of statistics, and so this last question is actually for you, Kercena, because you were talking about research, and I'm interested, like we all talked about that, it's frequently citing it, but I think I'm curious on your thoughts about like, how do we marry like research with practice, right, and policy work? I think like it's easy to have these things and have this research that's staying what we should be doing, but how can we go about actually facilitating that those two things go together towards making the policy recommendations that the city and the state really need?
I think that one thing that we can do is that we can also be very vocal when it comes to claims, for example, that youth violence has gone up when it may not have, and it's just a short-term trend that has happened in the past month or so. I think that one thing that we can do is be very mindful of the fact that data are out there and we can access them and use them to think more about how to help communities rather than take away any kinds of policies that are actually ensuring community safety in the form that Kercena just talked about, where we ensure that children have what they need to grow up in a community that is supportive of them and won't actually lead them into a system that is very difficult to get out of.
Thank you for that. So that unfortunately is going to conclude our Q&A. It is now 5:30. We have no time left, so I'm going to pass it back towards you, Caitlin, just to kind of round us off and say thank you again to the panelists. This conversation doesn't start here, so please tap in with them all.
Wonderful. Thank you again. Thank you so much, Tyler, for moderating a 6-person panel. Like, that's incredibly impressive, and we're so grateful to have your brilliance in this space with us today. Thank you to all of our panelists. Y'all were amazing. I learned so much. And I really hope that everyone watching was able to have a really informative time with us today as well. I'm dropping my email in the chat. Feel free to email me with any questions. I know we had some chat struggles today. So if you had a question that didn't get answered, please follow up. We would love to get back to you with any answers that we can provide. Most of the answers will be we're gonna have to work on it together. And yes, we agree, we want this too. And so let's make sure that we can really keep mobilizing, keep working towards this. Again, there'll be the recording and all the links I've dropped in the chat available to you within the next week or so. And just big round of applause for everyone. And thank you so much. So I hope everyone has a safe and healthy evening, and couldn't imagine a better way to walk out of Youth Justice Month. So really hoping that this time next year we have some of these bills passed. So looking forward to working with you all in the months to come. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.
Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you so much, Tyler.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Y'all, good night.
Good night.